I'm Arun Rath. Tonight on Greater Boston, we'll dig into the rise of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his wife, conservative activist Ginny Thomas, and the controversies they've been caught up in since all documented in the latest film from Frontline. Then, two local women sharing their experiences coping with grief and mental health struggles, one of whom sought help from, of all sources, Friends actor David Schwimmer. There is a crisis of confidence in the Supreme Court. Just over a third of the country has faith in the institution, according to a recent poll. That's down more than 20% since 2018, before the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, one in a series of controversial rulings decided by the court's conservative majority. The major shift in public confidence also follows a series of ethics concerns surrounding a few of the court's justices, particularly Clarence Thomas, who, along with his wife Ginny Thomas, is now under scrutiny for accepting lavish gifts from the wealthy conservative developer Harlan Crow, thanks to a series of investigative reports from ProPublica. A new film from Frontline digs into all of it.
A bombshell report in ProPublica.
Clarence Thomas accepted millions of dollars of luxury vacations.
Amid controversy.
Ginny Thomas under scrutiny for her efforts to help overturn the election.
Their histories.
She grew up with Republican activism.
He felt resentment, victimization, anger.
Their influence.
It's often referred to as the Thomas Court.
Roe versus Wade is overruled.
The film is Clarence and Ginny Thomas, Politics, Power, and the Supreme Court. Director and producer Michael Kirk joins me ahead of its premiere. Mike, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Nice to see you.
So, one of the first things I want to ask about with this film is partly because it relates to Clarence Thomas's formative years here in Massachusetts, and it also gives us a sense of how far he came, was his time at Holy Cross College here in Massachusetts. First off, tell us about the Clarence Thomas who arrived at Holy Cross.
Well, he has about the worst backstory I've ever heard for almost anybody. A terrible deprivation in his childhood, growing up in Pinpoint, Georgia, down at the very, very heart of really a piece of America that had been forgotten by the government, by agencies, by anything else. A sort of fishing village right near Savannah, and really, really, really horrible life experience. He'd been abandoned by his father when he was very little. His mother, unable to take care of him, dropped him off with his grandfather, his abusive, overwhelmingly angry grandfather, who basically locked him up in a closet and beat him with a belt many more times than you would imagine. Tries to go to the seminary to learn to be the first black priest in Savannah, the way everybody touted him. It wasn't going to work out. He was racially treated poorly at the seminary by the white kids, primarily white kids. He gets a scholarship to Holy Cross as the head priest is out doing the first wave of affirmative action. And it's a school at the time with about 2,000 white students, 28 black students, all Catholic, and Clarence is Catholic at the time, and goes in with some of his friends from Savannah, and in they go to Holy Cross, where it's the 60s. And we call the section in the film Clarence X because he becomes a kind of campus radical, takes on the trappings of the Black Panthers, wears combat boots and and a beret. His favorite person in the world is Malcolm X. He memorizes the speeches. He does the everything. Clarence Thomas, from the deprivation that he started with, a beneficiary of the first wave of affirmative action, finds himself at a very good school up in Worcester, getting a very good education.
And then Clarence X, as it were, he describes himself as an angry young black man, takes part in some civil unrest in Harvard. Tell us about that and how it was kind of a turning point.
Clarence had never really had a kind of group that he'd ever belonged to. He didn't have a lot of friends. The kids had made fun of him when he was little. He just literally had a a tough road, and he was rejected every place he went. He found a home with a handful of black students who were angry and wanted to be part of the anti-war civil rights struggle from college. So they heard that there was going to be a big event at Harvard Square. They jump in the car and drive the 40 miles down to Harvard Square, and they do participate in a night of drinking, revelry, anger, breaking windows, in the biggest at its time. On the national news reports that the event in Harvard Square, 200, I think, people were injured, 40 students were arrested. It was a big event that Clarence participated in, then came back to campus up in Worcester and just was heartsick at himself, questioning whether he should have done it, having a real crisis about whether being the angry young man that he was really the road he wanted to take. He kind of buckles down, finishes, I think, 7th or 8th in his class, and the day after graduation gets married to, as he says, the only girl who'd been nice to him the entire time he was in college. So his experiences in that place and in that environment involve a real sea change from somebody from the South who knows nothing, somebody who decides to join the Panthers and at least to emulate the Panthers, and Malcolm X gets involved in something he doesn't really like. It becomes all too real to him, and finally does really well in school, starts wearing a suit and tie, and marries the very first a woman who was nice to him, and gets from that a scholarship to Yale Law School, another affirmative action moment. So that's the trajectory of the Clarence Thomas we really profile, along with his wife Ginny, in our film about the rise of these two people and the effect they have on the Supreme Court and on the politics of America, a very big effect that they have on the politics of America and the Supreme Court right now.
And when they came together, you document in the film how, well, actually, the two of them meet at an affirmative action conference?
Yes, as somebody says in the film, if you were writing a novel, nobody would believe this novel. It's these two, a white woman from Omaha, who's the daughter of a political activist who worked with Phyllis Schlafly to do away with the ERA. So she's very binary. There's good, there's evil, with a religious fervor. She goes out and tries to knock down what in those days were called women's libers. And here's Clarence walking away from Black orthodoxy, not wanting to be a radical anymore, he was hoping at the time that he could go to Yale Law School and become a wealthy litigator in New York City. It doesn't work out that way. So he's working in government as the head of the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Commission, and in the Reagan administration, of all things. And they meet in New York City at a convention, an anti-affirmative action convention. And as they say in the movies, the rest is history.
Now, Mike, you had been working on this documentary already for a while when we got this latest revelations that came out about Clarence Thomas from ProPublica, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing when you can spend 6 months on something, thinking you're making an hour, but you get so much stuff, especially from the backstory, the history of Clarence and Ginny, that you say, well, maybe we can get 90 minutes out of it. We can open it all up. PBS is willing to do it, and then you decide you've got 2 hours, and just at exactly that moment, the news breaks from ProPublica that there's been a relationship uncovered between a very wealthy billionaire in Texas and Clarence and Ginny that for years has been resulted in incredibly lavish vacations, flying on private jet, riding on a yacht, going to Indonesia, going to New Zealand, going to lots of other ports of call all over the world with this Texas billionaire and his friends, many of whom happen to be people who might potentially have cases before the Supreme Court. So that when that news breaks, we know how we'll fill up the final half hour of the 2-hour film, and it will be with our own investigation and ProPublica's trying to lay out the real ethical questions that now face Clarence and Ginny, both of whom have received questionable, although not illegal, questionable gifts and contributions from at least this one very wealthy white man named Harlan Crow.
Well, it is remarkable how it ties so many of these things together because, well, first off, I mentioned at the outset how your film advances the argument that this is now John Roberts may be the Chief Justice, but this is the Thomas Court. He leads this conservative faction. We also talked about the loss of confidence in the Supreme Court. And it seems like what we've just seen with this recent reporting really underscores that. That's even before this is even really sunk in, that people have this lack of confidence. Do you think that where things are right now, can the Thomas Court regain the public confidence?
Well, this is the question, Arun, and this is a big one. As we all remember, there have been many people have been, especially in legal circles, academic legal circles, very, very worried about the nature of the court, especially when Mitch McConnell did not replace or did not allow President Obama to replace after the death of Antonin Scalia, Justice Scalia, with Merrick Garland, who now ends up being our Attorney General under the Biden administration. So when that happened, and people started to look at the makeup of the court and realized that Donald Trump, who was the enemy of many people in the country who wanted to see a more liberal legal system, when they saw what Trump was doing with McConnell, sort of packing the court with very conservative justices for a lifetime appointment, there were lots of questions that started to be raised about the duration that somebody could serve. Is lifetime appointment really the right thing to do? Are we limited to only 9 justices? Should we have more? Should we have fewer? Should there be term limits? All those questions were already at play when suddenly Clarence Thomas, as he's about to really move forward with this conservative majority on the court and go into areas like affirmative action and many other, more on voting rights, more cases will come up, the Chevron case, many others that are coming forward. A lot of people, especially progressives, would like to see the makeup of the court change and believe that what Thomas is receiving these gifts, I guess they're gifts, and not reporting them, and not under any obligation to report them, whether that is something that at least that needs to change, more stringent regulations for reporting gifts. But on the other hand, what can you punish them with? It's a lifetime appointment. It's a job forever. And Roberts and no other members of the court seem to be talking about let's go inside and change the rules inside the organization.
Right.
So what happens when people start to drop off? That's the big question that hangs over the story now.
Mike, it has been great talking with you. It's 2 hours, but this thing really flies by. Check it out. Mike, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Arun. Thank you.
The film premieres tomorrow night at 9 here on GBH2 and online at pbs.org/frontline. Next up, mental health care can be tough to access on a good day, but in the midst of a crisis, it can feel impossible. It's a problem the Boston Globe's Kara Baskin knows well. And to kick off Mental Health Awareness Month, she shared her experience in the paper. Writing about her struggles to find a therapist and navigate crisis care systems only set up to respond to life or death situations, while at the same time, quote, trying to keep it all hidden from her 2 young kids. Not easy. While working, because, psychiatrist and therapy appointments are expensive and not usually covered by insurance. Of course, mental health support can look different for everyone. Also for the chair of the board of directors for Samaritans Incorporated, Samantha Joseph, who recently shared her experience about coming to terms with the suicide of a beloved relative in the New York Times. Help came from the most unlikely of places, the words of actor David Schwimmer. Samantha Joseph and Kara Baskin join me now. Samantha Joseph, Kara Baskin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
Kara, I wanted to start with you, the acute case, as it were. Can you finish setting up the scene that you wrote about, the episode you wrote about, where you found yourself in a crisis that sent you to the emergency room? You've had issues with anxiety in the past, but ever anything like this before?
Yes. So once before in 2007, and I had written about that when it happened too. I was actually on my honeymoon in Hawaii. My poor husband. He's been through it all with me. I started getting a series of panic attacks that would not go away, and basically I had to take a leave of absence from work. At the time, I worked at a fancy magazine in Washington D.C., and this was back in 2007, and this is really before anybody said the words panic attack or anxiety. There was a little talk of depression, but really not that much. And I really could not go to work. I was that debilitated, and I had to sort of come clean with my bosses, with my editors, and explain what was going on. And, everyone surprised me with their compassion. It turned out that my boss actually had panic disorder as well. I ended up going on the Today Show and talking about it, and it was really cathartic in the end. But at the time, back in 2007, it was incredibly isolating. And it all came roaring back again in 2019. And that time, I don't quite know what set it off, except for a kidney stone, which might make anybody go a little bit nuts. But
well, that's pretty traumatic, though.
Yeah, it was somewhat traumatic. I'd been in a lot of pain, and I hadn't been sleeping, and I was sort of right back in the same place that I was in 2017 or in 2007.
You lost like 30 pounds. You wrote it. Sounds pretty brutal.
I mean, best diet ever, but I was really miserable, and somehow I was still managing to work and sort of keep up appearances. And this duality can be really hard because, unlike a physical illness, it doesn't manifest often outwardly. It's very private. And unless you tell people, they might not know that you're suffering.
And you're in a situation right now, though, where you're taking care of 2 young kids.
Right.
So talk about how a job, 2 young kids you're caring for. How do you fit in a crisis?
Yeah, and you might hear one of them in the background. I apologize in advance for the Zoom situation. It was really hard on them, and I felt terribly because, I'm a person who's really high energy. You might be able to tell I'm pretty outgoing, and I really didn't leave my bed. I did not leave my bedroom for a couple of months, and my kids definitely knew something was off. They were in, I believe, 3rd grade and preschool at the time. My husband was really doing it all. I had a lot of support from my brother, which was great. But, absent that family support, I was sort of just slogging through on my own and trying to keep up appearances for my children. And I'm not sure that I did such a good job. My older son began to be afraid of being left alone, and he was afraid if I wasn't around him, and he didn't like to be left with other people. And he was a pretty resilient kid. So to see that behavior change in him, it made me feel badly.
Let's talk about your experience with care, that initial trip to the emergency room. Mm-hmm. How did that go? How did the doctors react to you?
Several. And it's not their fault. ERs are not set up. They're not oriented toward the type of problem that I had. They want, and very rightfully so, they want to keep you from harming yourself, and they perhaps want to detox you, but they're not dealing with this sort of grim drudgery of every day where you might feel this agony and despair. They're not oriented toward getting rid of your existential despair. They just want to keep you alive. So I got there, and, they did the things that they were supposed to do. They followed protocol. They drug tested me. And then, it really only serves, though, to make you feel even more alone, because I was given 2 choices, and neither of them really felt like a choice at all. I could go to an a psychiatric floor of a nearby hospital, a locked unit, which meant I wouldn't see my children. I wouldn't have my laptop. I wouldn't have any of my things. And I would be there for a week. Or else I could do an adult daycare center. That's really what they call them, adult day therapy. And you go every day for maybe 6 to 8 hours, and you get treatment. And for me, that wasn't viable either, because I worked and I needed to work. I needed, income, because psychiatry and therapy aren't cheap. So neither of them felt like an option. And I just ended up going home and, toughing it out for another couple of months.
And there was a point, though, where you said that it's not like there was a turning point so much, but gradually a point at which the good days outnumbered the bad days.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think, when we hear narratives about mental illness or any kind of illness, there's always an arc, right? There's always sort of the initial descent, and then there's sort of the triumph. And this wasn't a cinematic story. This wasn't like one day I woke up and I was healed or I took a magic pill. It was just like hanging in there day after day after day, faking it a little bit if I had to. You know, I tried to still work, and I tried to be cheerful, and I tried to be up, and maybe I was lying a little bit to other people just to kind of keep up appearances, which, you know, a lot of us who have mental health struggles do. And then one day in late December, I just remember waking up and not feeling so badly anymore. And that's exactly what happened to me in 2007 as well. And that's really what I was trying to get across with this piece is, you know, it might not look the way you think it's going to look. It's not like you confide in a friend and they make it all better, or you go to the ER and they heal you. Healing is a little bit more private and it can be quiet. But, you know, hopefully it really does happen and there is hope.
And in Samantha, in your case that you wrote about, we're also talking about a very long process. Samantha Joseph, you write about the suicide of your beloved aunt. This was more than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
First, though, tell us about her. What was her name? Tell us why you loved her so much.
Thank you for asking that. I think it's really important to me to remember her life, you know, not just how she died. So her name is Gail. She was an incredible person. You know, when I was a little kid, she was the most interesting adult I had ever met because she lived in Hollywood and she was friends with, you know, people I watched on television. And, you know, I've had the joy really of connecting with people who knew her in the last couple of days since the article came out. And just to hear over and over again how beloved she was, how much laughter and joy she brought to people's lives has been really special.
She was 39 when she killed herself.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, that this was 1999.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a situation where feelings can be deeply unresolved. There must have been some. Obviously, there were questions that were hanging around that caused it to stay with you so long.
Yeah, I was 16 at the time, and it was such an isolating experience. You know, back then, kind of like with Kara, people weren't really talking openly about suicide. There was a lot of stigma, you know, and so people who have lost loved ones were really kind of alone with that grief, even though it is one of the most common experiences people have. You know, when I talk about it now, I'm meeting people all the time who've experienced something similar. So what's so important is that organizations like Samaritans, in addition to providing crisis services, are actually providing grief support services. You know, so we're connecting families with each other who've experienced that loss to create that space where people can really share openly, where they don't feel judged. And what we understand is that when somebody has had a loss to suicide, they're actually more at risk, right? So, you know, it's not uncommon to see more than one suicide in a family or friend group. And so by supporting lost survivors, we are actually doing suicide prevention, right? We are really potentially providing that lifeline.
Wow. And I know suicide that happens at any age, obviously, is horrendous and tragic, but the age of 39, that's, I think in grief counseling, they call that an out-of-order death. And that's the kind of thing that it's just, it's really difficult to resolve that, right?
Yeah, and I think kind of like Kara said, you know, one of the friends I spoke with yesterday, one of her friends said if she had just been able to push through that hard time, right, you know, that she might have come out the other side of that, you know, and had the opportunity to live many years, you know, and to contribute more, to do her job, to be with her family and friends. You know, it's in those critical moments of crisis, you know, to find the support that you need so you can get past that, you know, and that's what Samaritans is there for. You know, recently the country developed a 3-digit phone number for getting help, right? So it's 988. It's never been easier to remember. And the idea is that, you know, that ideally we're providing a lifeline. It doesn't work for everybody, you know, but the hope is that for people who call it, you know, that it might help them get through that one hard night that allows them to keep fighting just a little bit longer.
I want to talk about the David Schwimmer moment, but first, the point in this essay that really stuck with me, and I think a lot of people probably who read it, was you engaged in something, past life regression therapy. And I just mentioned to people that this is something that it might sound out there. It's actually not. It's actually something that's quite legitimate in grief therapy. It doesn't mean you believe in past lives, but it's also a way of being able to deal with things. So having stipulated that for you,
Thank you.
Tell us about this experience you had with the past life regression.
Yes, I'm lucky that one of my closest friends decided to become a practitioner. So it was a person that made me feel really comfortable. And the idea that really resonated for me was that, right, I didn't have to believe in anything. If I learned something helpful, I could give that meaning for myself, no matter where I thought that wisdom was coming from. And the idea that in this moment, as a result of this experience, that I got this wisdom that there is no why. Not that there's no why she died. There's a lack of mental health care. There's, all kinds of reasons why why we're losing people. But that as a person in grief, trying to make sense of it, that I could spend the rest of my life asking questions and I would never get an answer that was going to be enough. And if that was true, it was time to move on.
And that finding out that there is no why is liberating somehow.
Yeah, I thought that it gave me a chance to stop asking, to stop looking for information that would explain why she died, and instead to give me a chance to celebrate who she was, right? And to really remember the kind of person she was, and not to let this one dark moment in her life define her.
So your aunt was a writer for the TV show Friends in the 90s.
Yeah, she actually was, she sort of managed part of the comedy division, so she actually got to, instead of writing, she was actually working directly with the cast.
Wow.
And helping them, with their public lives.
And you've long wanted to talk to David Schwimmer about her, and finally got the opportunity to. Tell us first about the build-up to it, and then what the actual exchange was like.
Yeah, and she had worked with many celebrities, and so I would have been excited to talk to anybody who had worked with her. I understood from her friends that there was something very special about her connection to him, and that she admired him, and she came into the lives of that cast right as they were becoming kind of superstars. So she played this really pivotal role in being their kind of caretaker and protector. So yeah, I always was interested in connecting with him. I found out he was going to be at a conference. I think I made up a pretty bad excuse as to why I should go to this particular conference, and just decided that this was like my chance to maybe learn something about her that would give me a sense of peace.
And what did he say?
Yeah, I mean, I was so nervous. I made this beeline for him so that I wouldn't lose my nerve, and I just kind of spit it out. You knew my aunt, and I kind of waited. And he just immediately, everything about his face, his posture changed. He said that he remembered her, that they loved her, that the cast loved her, which is everything I wanted to hear. And then he went even further to say that this conversation, that it meant something to him, that my asking him about her gave him a chance to think about her, and that he appreciated it. And so that was, I think that's what I've heard in the days since I wrote the story, is that is what any one of us could hope when we're talking about somebody we lost, that somebody else would say, thank you for giving me the chance to remember them, kind of says everything you need.
Well, Samantha, thank you for this. It's been wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And Kara Baskin as well. Great pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching. I'm Arun Rath. Good night.
Next time on Antiques